everyone. Welcome back to It's All Light. I'm your host, Natalie Baugh, and today's guest is Parker C. Wilson. Hi, Parker.
Hey, Natalie.
So let's get started by just learning about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Gladly. Yeah. So I am on this channel to talk a little bit about my books as a self-published, award-winning young adult fantasy author.
So cool.
Thank you.
Had you always loved writing?
Yes. Ever since I was 12, when I first started to write, uh, there was this really cool project in elementary school where my teachers encouraged us to write our own short stories,
Wow.
and then they would laminate the books for us, and I got to draw all the pictures and tell the stories. We did this about 3 times, and I think on the third time it really stuck with me.
Wow.
So ever since then, I've been writing stories, and it was about two years ago that I finally self-published my first novel right here, Excalibur's Pendragon.
So cute. And
Here's
did
a
you
copy.
illustrate that too?
Yes, yeah. This
Wow,
is
that's
the
awesome.
this is the paperback edition. This is the original hardback edition right here, as you can
So
see.
cool. Excalibur's Pendragon.
Yep.
Cool. What does Pendragon mean?
So uh, it has reference to King Arthur and Arthurian
Mm,
legend. So
cool.
basically, if you look back into Britannic lore, Pendragon translates to chieftain warrior. So it can be considered more of a title than an actual name. Whereas in the traditional King Arthur stories, that probably like around uh, the later tellings told by Le Morte Arthur and later adapted into like modern day film franchises. That was his name.
Mm,
I'm treating this as a title that in the story was carried by predecessors of King Arthur and
mm.
has been inherited by a modern day successor, King Arthur's successor.
His successor.
Yes,
Well, that's cool. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Bountiful, Utah.
Okay. And that's
Just a fun area where there's lots of greenery and
that's
just
beautiful.
a lot of amazing people that I know from there. So
Nice.
maybe I'm biased because I grew up there.
No, it's great. So, I'm just trying to get a little bit more background about who you are before we dive more into your book because I want to hear all about it. But
Awesome.
what is a fun fact about you besides you're an author, an award
Okay.
winning author?
Yeah. So a little bit more about me. I work not just as an author, but primarily as a software engineer.
Oh, wow.
So I like to program things. I like to build applications.
That's awesome.
Currently, I work in the fintech industry, helping to develop banking software,
Wow.
and so that's my day job. One of my other hobbies besides writing is that I like to box. I
Whoa,
feel
no
like it's
way.
the best things I've done for my health.
That's awesome. Do you go to a special boxing gym then?
Yeah, I go to Legends Boxing in Orem. I highly
Nice.
recommend going there. It's a great gym. If you ever go there, make sure to reach out to Coach Eric Acosta. He's an awesome dude,
That's awesome.
and so are the rest of the coaches there.
Does boxing help get your mind into like a ready to write state? Or is there a segue
Yeah,
there?
yeah. There's definitely a connection. I feel like with my physical health and my mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
if I wasn't boxing, I think I wouldn't be able to write as well or be in that mind state to write like I do.
I love that. That's so cool. So, multi award winning. Tell us about these awards you've won with this book.
Yeah, yeah. I'll start with the first one. Let's see. The Pencraft Awards, Best Book winner of summer 2023 in
Wow.
fantasy. You can see that on the cover right here. Pencraft,
Woohoo!
Literary Titan.
Wow.
This was a fun organization that also did a book trailer for me that people can
Wow.
see on my website.
Cool.
And one of my more recent awards, the Bookfest Awards, second place
Amazing.
winner in fantasy and mythology. And it's not on the cover, but a fourth award that I've won is the reader's favorite 5-star seal.
That's awesome. No, I look
Thank
forward
you.
to getting your book and reading it. It sounds so fun. So, now for the next question. What do you light up about? You kind of mentioned a few things, obviously, this being one of them, but tell us about some of the other things you light up about.
Yeah,
And you,
gladly.
yeah.
So I feel like I feel like the things that I light up about before my writing, my family, my friends, my faith, as well as just about anything that I feel like helps me to explore life in a new way. I like to try different things, and I like being able to fill the world with what little goodness I have. I feel just
Mhm.
because I feel like everyone has that gift, everyone has a story to tell, and I personally want to try to share what I have to offer.
I like that. You said a little bit of goodness you have. I'm sure you have greater goodness than you realize. And goodness is goodness, right? Whether it's big or small.
Right.
I love that. That is beautiful. I can see that like being impactful to all those areas you light up about. How do you do that as an author? How do you feel you touch people?
That's a good question, and I think it's only because I've had a few different encounters with either people who have read my book
Mm-hmm.
or whose own family members have read the book, and I think the reason why I continue to keep writing
Mm-hmm.
is that a while back I heard of someone, a younger teen, who was reading my book, and it was meaningful enough for them to read it a second time, and I think it's because the main character of my book,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write about a character who um, felt like he needed more light in his life and
Wow.
was able to find it, even though in some ways it was rough. It's the story goes up and down, but I think that's what life is about: learning how to find light when you're on a roller coaster of
Mm-hmm.
life, metaphorically
It's like
speaking.
a dark roller coaster. Sometimes you don't even know where you're going to go, if it's going to dip up or if it's going to dip down. Like
Right.
the faith needed to go through life is hard to find sometimes. Faith, light, like sometimes to me those are synonymous, and when we take steps in the dark, sometimes things can become brighter. So when you set out to write your books, like was that always kind of in the back of your mind of like what you wanted to portray as like a moral of the story, or how did that develop?
I think it definitely took a while for me to develop that. I started writing this story when I was 12.
Whoa.
I mean,
Because, like you said, in your classes, and this was the third time writing these short stories, right?
yeah, like the idea for Excalibur's Pendragon evolved from one that started back then.
Wow.
But as I got older and when I reached my 20s, I began to feel like I wanted to write something if I was going to keep writing in the first place, just because it's a time commitment,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you are writing something that takes a while for other people to finally get their hands on, to give them a physical, tangible uh,
Copy
thing
to edit.
with the copy. Yeah, so I wanted. It's not like it's always easy. Sometimes I feel like I need motivation, or rather, I need to motivate myself.
Hmm.
And for me, being able to tell the story of a person who felt like he was lacking light in his life due to personal loss or personal challenges,
Yeah.
that was something meaningful for me to write about, just because I was able to connect with it. And I've come to recognize that other people connect with that as well.
That is so beautiful. So it took time to develop the characters as well as this moral of the story of like just finding light when you're going through hard times.
Definitely. And there are going to be future books for this one that continues that theme. And I feel like every time I get back to writing about that specific aspect, I feel I feel motivated to just keep it going.
Yeah, you mentioned that, like having to find self motivation to write these books. How else do you find motivation in your life? I have a hard time self motivating. It's really hard.
Right. I think having that balance that we talked about with all those other things,
Mm-hmm.
just because I mean, sure, like, do I sometimes wish I had more time to write than I do? Like, that's every author's wish,
Yeah.
especially when they're self-published. But in all honesty, if I were to focus on this 100% of the time without giving attention to the other areas of my life, eventually uh, it would just come back with, I think, more negative consequences than if I were to have that balance that I feel like gave me the strength in order to have this as a healthy outlet instead of a,
Think you have to get done.
yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
exactly.
So, how many books have you written? Four, you said, or no?
So this is the first one. This is the
Okay.
first one. But I want to write at least 4 to 5 more.
In that
Uh,
series or separate?
in
In a
this series. Yeah,
series.
I'm currently working on the second one, and
Cool.
that book was so big that I had to split it up into two because it involved different characters and different two different stories in some ways.
Yeah. How do you, when you start writing, do you have to develop a character basically entirely before you can put them in the story, or how does this work? I'm like, I wish I knew more about writing. Like, one day I'd love to write a book, but I don't know anything.
Like, there's no definite science, I feel. Excuse me.
You're good.
Exactly to how to write. You have different approaches for doing it. Some
Mm-hmm.
writers like to discover it as they're writing and then kind of figure out how to work from there. Other people like to be more structured straight from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
They want to plot out as things go. F There needs to be a little bit of flexibility, just because uh, writing the story exactly how you want it, your ideas change, your feelings change about how you're writing it,
Yeah.
and but you have to have at least some sort of direction. I feel my piece of advice to anyone who's trying to write a book:
Yeah.
uh, focus on a theme if that's what you're wanting to focus on
Mm-hmm.
most,
Is your
and
is your
yeah,
theme the light and the darkness? Is that your theme, would you say? Okay. And then
yeah,
what's
yeah,
the
and
next
having
thing?
faith, and
And
then using that theme to basically find a starting point and then work toward an ending point.
mm-hmm.
Like, and this is me personally, but I feel like stories without a climax that you had decided on just keep getting dragged out and dragged out. You
Ooh.
have to have some kind of conclusion that you're working toward, and that's something I currently have. But like 4 to 5 books isn't just something random. Like, I feel like that's the amount of books that I want to write to tell the full story that I
And
have.
and you already have the ending at the end of the fourth or fifth book in your head ready to go. And
Exactly.
then the climax you said you already have decided too?
Uh, it's mostly there. It's
Mostly there.
mostly there.
So you
But
yeah, I remember that line in my writing class. It's like the intro and it goes up and then it goes down and then you have the explanation or whatever they would for when we learn to how to write. But that's cool that like some of those pieces still apply to like professional authors.
that's how it applies to me specifically, at least.
That's so
There
cool.
there's no exact science to it all, but I do feel like that's an essential part, is knowing what story you want to tell and having that vision be the direction to the climax, and ultimately letting that climax emphasize or
Mm-hmm.
highlight the overall thing you're trying to do, at least for the types of stories that I like to write.
That's awesome. And this is an award winning, folks, so pay attention if you're trying to write a book. Um, Another thought I had was what authors have inspired or motivated you? What
Great
books?
question. I think the earliest writers who inspired me, one of them was Brandon Mole.
Hmm.
If you know his books, the Fablehaven series and the
Yeah,
Dragonlance series, that was a huge inspiration to me when I was growing up.
cool.
I've read all of his Fablehaven books and all of his Dragon Watch books, and I was able to connect with the characters just because they were my age at the time, and they
Mm-hmm.
also have, even though like I was in my 20s when I read the Dragon Watch series, and the characters are still roughly their age. I was able to connect because there is a focus on light during dark and difficult times.
Hmm. And then you say that, and my mind just goes to the Dumbledore quote, like happiness can only be found if one in darkness when one remembers to turn on the light. Yeah. What other authors, like as you've gone on your journey and have written your book, kind of helped inspire you?
I really liked the book series, The Wing Feather Saga. That was a fun one. It's kind of geared toward a younger audience, but is enjoyable for the whole family. They actually have a TV series based off that now
Really?
that I actually recommend.
Young Feather? What was it? Wing.
Wing Feather, the
Wing
Wing Feather
Feathers.
Saga.
The
You
Wing
can
Feather
find it on
Saga.
Good Angel. It's the first season. I actually thought it was pretty nice. So there was that
Nice.
one. I also read a bunch of other books. Just thinking about them all, really. I remember reading Orbit Sky's Levin Thumps series. That
Hmm.
was from when I was in elementary school. I'm thinking about all the book series I read when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But as of late, I mean, I've read some Brandon Sanderson books
Mm-hmm.
like the Miss Sports series. I've
Cool.
also read other books by I think it's George R. Dixon who wrote the Dragon Knight series. It's an
Hmm.
older fantasy series, but it also focuses on
Arthur?
finding finding light during dark times.
Cool. That's awesome. I know. Maybe I'll have to add a list of these books in our show notes so people can find them. So, my take on authors is that they have to read a ton and they love reading and they read a ton because that makes them a better writer. Is that true?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Not only does it help you to feel like you can figure out like grammar a little bit better because like
Mm,
I mean knowing how to articulate your story is more helpful when you can see how other people communicate what words they use to communicate theirs.
mm-hmm.
Ultimately every writer's style is their own and they have to discover that and refine that even,
Yeah.
but reading definitely helps me personally when I'm writing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I'm pivoting to something you elaborated on the form. You said you create these stories that help people find peace and strength during challenges. And sometimes that peace and strength is the light, right? Are those synonymous or what would you add?
Peace and strength. Oh, do you mind asking the question again?
Yeah,
Just wanting to
so
make
you
sure.
create stories that help people find peace and strength during challenges. Is that synonymous with light in the darkness? Or are those separate?
I think they are synonymous just because uh, light, peace, and strength. And does it mean that all those things are easy during the times? Like we talk about light and darkness, and they aren't literal. They aren't always literal. We have to often think about like what it
Internally.
means to be strong during hard times, and often that means like uh, making the harder choice in the short term, but that harder choice is what leads to more lasting peace in the long term.
Why do you think that is? That's like a theme of life, right? And I don't get it.
It's a really good question, I think, because like you have this trade off. I think it was Tony Robbins. He came up with this quote: the pain pleasure principle."
Yeah.
So basically, it is one of two things. You can have short term happiness and long term pain, or you can have short term pain and long term happiness. I'm hoping I'm saying
I
that
think you're
right.
saying that right. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
like ultimately, you can choose whether you want the short term pain or the short term happiness, but like the consequences tied to those things are inseparable.
Wow. That's so cool. And you feel like your characters go through this multiple times, or do you think it's multiple times but it's also the whole plot of the story, right? Is this hard time to enduring happiness, right?
Right. That's a good question. Looking back at my story, sometimes I find that this that I see certain elements of the story that I hadn't noticed before, even while I was writing. That kind of sounds silly. I'm the author. Like,
No,
shouldn't I
that's
know everything
cool.
about
That's
the
really
story?
cool.
But in all honesty, yeah, there are. there are times that when I go through the story, I can see that this person had the choice essentially to um, back away and focus on the short term happiness of the situation, or essentially, basically running away from the difficulty. But like you said, life is hard. It's a roller coaster,
Yeah.
and there are certain things that we just can't run away from in the end. But we can choose how we want to approach it.
Hmm. So what's your character's approach? How does he approach these difficult times?
Right. I'd say that my main character, his name is Ryan Walker. In the end of the book, without giving away any spoilers, he eventually has to make a certain decision
Mm.
that kind of emphasis on that emphasizes what we're talking about.
Wow. I need to
Uh,
read this because there's so many decisions in life. Okay, sorry, cut you off. Keep going.
oh, it's all good. This is exciting stuff. I mean, again, talking about like choices because we're all making choices,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what motivated him to make the choice in the end that he makes, whether to step out of a hero's quest, essentially, uh, that choice was made because of his choice to stay in the short term pain and to commit to a harder course of life.
Hmm.
It was inspired because of the help that he's had from other people in his lives, primarily his parents and his friends, seeing how they chose to live their lives and how that personally impacted him, and how the choice that he can
Needed to
make is
make.
a way of honoring what they did for him and also carrying on the legacy that they left behind for him.
Wow. It's so cool to hear you talk about this. I wonder, you talked about using your imagination to discover inspiration. Do you feel like a lot of that imagination stems from relationships in your own life and support you've had?
I definitely feel that way. Yeah, like I've had inspiration come from many different people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
They helped me to see things in a different way. And
Yeah.
while I try to make my characters unique and without like making my books copy my life, like every detail. Like I find inspiration for the books that I write from life itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like that is what makes reading more enjoyable for people, when they are able to go into a book, but it helps them to connect more with their life that they are actually in when they leave
Mm-hmm.
the book.
And I think it's beautiful that fantasy does do that. You don't necessarily need all these self help books. Sometimes there's even more benefits when you dive into a fantasy because it can escape for your mind, but also like help you sort through how you can take on life. And I feel like having a greater imagination can help you problem solve, can help you maybe make decisions thinking positively about the end goal or what could be instead of feeling anxious. How do you feel like that helps you?
It definitely helps me. I feel like there's this what you're talking about, stepping into the book and stepping out of it. It highlights this principle that you can find in even Shakespeare's stories,
Mm.
because in his stories, a lot of the characters step out of society and go into the woods. I like to call this theme the going into the woods
I love it.
principle, because they go into this in some cases this fantastical world,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not as grand as say like Harry Potter or something like that. But they escape society and go into the woods to basically discover something about themselves, even if they don't know that that's what they're doing. And then they come back and they're able to face society a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Going out into the woods to nature, like, I think resonates with everyone, even if they aren't like the most outdoorsy person. It's just there's power in that like moment and going out and doing things. How else do you build your imagination. My mind goes to like, I wrote a paper on Dungeons and Dragons, and there was like a TED talk about it, and he talked about the 5 reasons you should play D&D and like the benefits, and one was about your imagination and just growing and building your imagination. And how else do you do that in your life?
How else do I do that in my life? Let's see. Like using imagination
And
to.
and growing your imagination, like just
Oh,
opening
okay.
up your mind more.
Gotcha. I think the ways that I try to grow my imagination is by problem solving, like
Ooh.
having problem solving exercises, especially especially when that is such an important part of life.
Uh-huh.
We've been talking this whole time about how life is problematic, and that's because we we have that as an opportunity to learn and grow from them. So I think one of the ways that I try to have my imagination to grow it is by giving myself or giving the characters in my books new problems
New
that need to be
problems.
solved, and ways that kind of stretch their ability to think outside the box, and also to learn how to empathize with people more, or how to work with them a little bit more, or how to even rely upon a higher power if people decide that they want to try to do that.
That is so cool. I'm like now thinking about, I would love to write a book one day, and I've been trying to think about like what kind of book do I want to write, and all sorts of stuff. So my mind's starting to think through like, okay, like what could that be? How could it be like that? It's fun to let your mind just start going and see where it takes you. Oh, that's really cool. You mentioned another thing about your passion, and you touched on it a little bit when you get to meet people who have read your book and seeing what your book has done for them. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's honestly an amazing experience. I'll be honest, I wasn't anticipating becoming an award-winning author, but when I read reviews by people and they say how much they enjoyed it, uh, and yeah, every author wants for that, but I think I especially enjoy seeing how my books have have been enjoyed by younger readers.
Hmm.
I've had on a few occasions to either meet these younger readers in person, or to have
Wow,
their parents tell me that they couldn't put the book down,
I
and
love
that
that.
is such a rewarding feeling.
That is so cool. So your readers, young adults, you said from like 10 on, like what are the ages of people who read your book generally?
Generally, I try to make this family friendly, but I've written it for ages 13 and up,
Cool.
essentially.
That's awesome.
Uh, so I've had readers who were around that age range, like starting at 12 or 13, really enjoy it. I've also had people who were in their 60s enjoy it, or young adults enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
So
No, I'm
it,
looking forward to reading it. I'm excited.
I think I try making characters for everyone to connect to.
Hmm.
This isn't just like some stories you have just focused around like teens in high school.
Uh-huh.
I try to incorporate the perspective of teens and their parents, and also just other adults that are connected
Friends
somehow.
along the way. So, are there mystical creatures in your book?
Yeah, I'd say that there are. A fun fact about my book is that it's a blend between Arthurian legend and Celtic mythology
Oh,
and modern day sci-fi. So,
and sci fi. Wow.
well, so it depends on if you feel like there's a hard distinction between sci-fi and fantasy.
Mm.
Often those forms of storytelling kind of intermix a little bit. But to answer your question, I pulled a few. I pulled some inspiration from Celtic mythology
That's
that
cool.
included different creatures or uh, different people from older stories, and also kind of incorporated that into future books so that people can recognize where the Celtic mythology is.
Wow. Do you have to do a lot of research then to pull in this mythology?
Yeah, I've been doing some research, reading from different books,
Wow.
and
That's really
when
cool.
appropriate, like going online and watching documentaries and stuff. But like I'm trying to add my own spin to it, but having something to write about, having content that inspires me in what I do helps me to have something that I can have a slight twist on.
That's really cool. You feel like you have to have that firm foundation of these ideas or themes with the where you're pulling from, like Arthur, Celtic.
Uh, it helps to have, if you're going to write, if you're going to retell a mythology,
Mm-hmm.
it's good, in my opinion, to at least know the
Mm-hmm.
original stories that you're writing about. And I'm glad I did, because I feel like some people say this is Arthurian legend, but it doesn't incorporate a lot of the original story.
Mm-hmm.
I try to actually critique a little bit of the old Arthurian legend and do that because some of those stories were a little bit complex,
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging that gives the characters in almost some way, a fun redemption arc to go through.
Hmm. That's cool. There's so many pieces that go into it. It's fun to kind of pull it apart. Another piece that you kind of mentioned before is you help your character problem solve, and you mentioned have empathy for others. So two-part question. A, do you feel like when you write about Paul Walker, you are him? Like, do you feel like you're the main character as you write this story? And then second, how do you help your character, and how have you learned to practice more empathy in your own life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like writing about this character, Ryan, was a way for me to put myself in my shoes, and then like put myself in his shoes,
Mm-hmm.
and then in trying to help him learn how to empathize with others, that helped me to learn how to empathize with them as well. It was kind of a subconscious thing that I was
Mm-hmm.
doing at the time, but I felt like it was just something I did because I wanted to go down this path. And I feel like, if anything, if even if a person decides not to publish a book like I did, I feel like writing can help. Writing about characters uh, with different challenges that you may be experiencing or might not be experiencing, like, it's good to do your research and to kind of put yourself in their shoes before trying to write about it. But that is what empathy is, I think, learning how to put yourself in the other person's shoes.
And getting those new perspectives.
Definitely.
So you're like creating new perspectives for a character. So you're having to think through lots of different things. Wow, that's really cool. You also mentioned it helps you writing helps you develop a stronger relationship and faith in God. How? How does that help you?
I feel like that is the case for me, because it helps me to practice empathy from God's perspective, because without trying to sound like I have an overinflated ego about myself, writers are essentially the gods of their own stories
Oh
that
no,
they're,
100%.
yeah, yeah. Like, if I'm literally putting my characters through hard things that I or others sometimes go through, or even if the people who I write about are fictitious, like, it's not always fun to put them through hard things, because that feels real, and I feel like that is, from my perspective, something that God thinks about too. But he knows that we need these challenges in order to learn how to develop problem solving skills, how to learn how to respect each other more, love each other more, but also learn how to expect more of ourselves and say,
Yeah.
I have something to give. I have something that I can offer. And because of that, I feel like writing writing at least this book, for me personally, maybe some authors don't always feel about it, but this is my personal experience with it. I feel like writing this book helped me to recognize that my faith in God is what helps me to get through dark times, and that's what He has offered me.
Hmm. So your character, I'm guessing, isn't like faith in God type, but he has to have faith in just life, right? Or I'm assuming your book doesn't talk about faith in God, but how do you
Um,
portray that?
I mean, I allude to it a little bit just because there like there are characters who some believe in God, other characters don't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't my books aren't a way of shoving faith in God down other people's throats.
Totally.
Saying like I'm saying through these characters that this particular character, Ryan Walker, the main character, he in the book he doesn't really know whether to believe in God at first, and at the end of the book, it's not that it's not necessarily that he's convinced entirely about God, but he's making the choice to go and say, "This is what this gives me something to hope for, and
Mm,
because of that, this gives me strength."
that's cool. That's really cool. All right. I think I have two more questions. Why should others know about this? And by this, I mean kind of everything we've talked about, being an author, why you light up about it. Why should others know about it?
Why should others know about why I like to write and why and my
Yeah.
books?
Yeah.
I I feel like there are people who are looking for books that are friendly for their kids and also help them to learn how to problem solve like we're talking about. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want to create stories that kids or young adults can process and help them to how do I put this? Help them learn how to face life a little bit more. And maybe this is a very narrow audience, but I personally feel like that's what I'm supposed to do with my books.
That's really cool. You mentioned like we're impacted by so much media and content that is produced and consumed. Like even a TikTok I saw, here I am media and consuming, they were like, back in the day we had maybe one Pixar movie a year, and now there's like five new ones on Netflix every month. Like just so much coming at us. What's the benefit of books? I mean, I think books are higher than like watching a movie that maybe has similar storylines, but why? Why is that better for kids and people in general?
Good question. I think that there are times when a movie is applicable and can do things to help younger minds or families in general to have a good time together. I feel like media media or books. I feel like books are applicable for when a person is trying to invest more of themselves and to discover things, also to learn how to grow themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Movies can do this,
Yeah.
regardless of whether a person gets this light that we're talking about from books or from movies. Society as a whole is influenced by the content that we watch or produce, and I'm trying to turn my attention more from quantity and focusing in on quality.
And quality. Yeah. And I feel like when you read, it's more immersive because your brain has to connect to the imaginative side to visualize it in your head versus a movie, it's all done for you, right? And you just watch it. So reading a book takes a little bit more effort, but that effort seems to be more valuable, especially with grammar and vocab and just developing your mind, right? Like reading helps us, in my opinion, become smarter.
And another thing too, reading a book is different for everyone, and that's because take they're able to take a little bit about themselves and put it into the story themselves. Like because when a writer writes a book, if he's leaving gaps for interpretation for people to uh, fill in with themselves,
Yeah.
that that helps them to have their own personal experience, their own journey that they need to go on.
That's so cool. Oh, I love that. Okay, I'm going to read a quote that you added onto the form. You say, I believe that storytelling is meant to do more than pull us away from our problems. When used correctly, this craft can strengthen us to turn our challenges into opportunities for growth and renewal. Parker, that was worded so beautifully. Like, I want to share that quote with everyone. Just how beautiful I mean, storytelling is everything. I mean, I work in marketing and that's our goal is storytelling, right? And everywhere we go, like we're trying to tell stories of our own lives. And it's just so beautiful that we have reading, and like you said, you don't have to write a whole book, but if you start writing, like, and maybe you put it into a character, that could help you solve some of your own life problems, like it, because then you start thinking about other ways to solve the problem, the new perspectives. It's really cool that it's a craft that can strengthen us. That's so cool. I love it. I love it. I love it. This has been so fun. I love hearing you talk about this. So, in conclusion, what would you say your uplifting takeaway is? You shared one, but you can just from our conversation, you can share what's on your mind.
Yeah, yeah. My uplifting takeaway from this, I'm trying to think what I haven't said before,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end, in the end, for regardless of whether it is storytelling through books or through art or through music or
Mm-hmm.
through any other medium, I feel like everyone has their own story that they're trying to tell. And in some cases, that story is their own lives. Like they're everyone has a light that they want to share through some kind of story that they want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice is if anyone feels unconfident about being able to tell that story, whether it is fictional, non-fictional, or personal or not personal, I say go for it just because if anyone has been impacted by my writing, it has been me. So go out and find that light that you want to share because it'll make it brighter.
I love that. That's like the whole premise of my podcast. Like, I'm like, come talk about it because then you will discover what it is and how you can grow brighter and how you can relate to other people. We didn't touch on this, but like you connect with other writers. I'm assuming you do different, I don't know, clinics. I don't know if you go to any of those, but I'm sure you connect all the time.
Yeah, I connect through social media. I connect through author events.
Cool.
You may find if you're local to Vineyard, Utah, you may find me at an author event in the
Cool.
future,
Author
or you
events.
can just find me on social
Yeah,
media, and
I love
I
that.
that's how I connect with authors there, or
That's
even
so
with
cool.
readers.
That's awesome. I know. I'll put all your information because you're like the fourth writer I've met in the last like year. I'm like, okay, maybe this is a sign that I should talk to more of these people and see where I can go. So you said, I'm going to quote you again, even if you don't put it to paper, you can still write it by living it. You can live your story. And I mean, we all are writing our life story as we live it. So we'll end with that. Oh, Parker, thank you so much. Everybody check out his book, Excalibur's Pendragon. I'll link it in our show notes and on Instagram. Man, it was a joy to hear an author speak about his passion. That was really cool. So thank you, Parker.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.